What is up, everyone? Alan's Movie Talk back at it again. Just got back from seeing Terrifier 3, so let's talk about it. Just because this is a franchise that I have yet to talk about on my page, I did want to give a little bit of a background of how I felt about the first two films. I wasn't a huge fan of the very first Terrifier. I felt like Art the Clown, was a good horror killer introduced in that film. I felt like he was funny in the way, with the whole mime clown angle that they had going in that film, but I didn't feel like there was a story or any characters that I particularly cared about. So it was really just, a film that was entirely art, basically going around a city killing people for a night. Terrifier 2 was really the one that got me on board with this character and with this franchise. Obviously, the story with Sienna, played by Lauren Lavera, who I think is one of now the best final girls ever. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The whole, story and rivalry that they had in part two and kind of the backstory with her dad and everything. I thought that was a lot more intriguing, and I just enjoyed part two much more. And then obviously, what this franchise is known for, the gore, the practical effects, I thought were insane. So yeah, wasn't a huge fan of one. Definitely very much enjoyed two, and it had me very very excited for part three. So with that being said, does Terrifier 3 live up to the hype that it has generated in the 2 years since the second one? And I think it does. I think this movie, in particular, what it does well is that it kind of has more of a grounded feel than Terrifier 2 did. Even though they definitely still get into the fantastical elements in this film, I felt like it was a good like bridge and kind of a combination of Terrifier 1 and 2, where the first two acts of this film essentially feel more in line with the grindhousey feel of the first one, and then kind of when you get into the third act and the big stuff starts happening, that's kind of when we get back to the fantastical elements that we got in Terrifier 2. And then another thing that I did kind of have a little bit of a problem with in the last film is it was about 2 hours and 20 minutes. I felt like in the third act of Terrifier 2, it kind of dragged on a bit and went a little longer than I felt like it needed to. This film's pacing is dramatically improved over the last film. It's about 2 hours, and I felt like it was perfect. To me, there wasn't a scene that was, super extended or super long or felt like it dragged. Everything that happens in this movie has a purpose, and it felt like a better pace than what we got in part two. And then, of course, when I talk with this series, I have to talk about the gore. And this movie pulls absolutely no punches whatsoever. The practical effects are fantastic, just like they were in the last two films. There isn't, in my opinion, one particular scene in the movie that kind of compares to the bedroom scene in its brutality and its viciousness. But this one, I would say, has a lot more like set pieces when it comes to the kills and builds around each individual kill a little bit better than that previous two films did. And particularly, won't get into spoilers, the shower scene. If you've watched the trailer, you've kind of seen little snippets of it. That one got crazy, and that was probably the best kill sequence of the film. And then to piggyback off that, I just love that this franchise goes practical with everything. Everything looks so much better and looks more realistic, even though there are definitely scenes where you can tell, like, hey, that's definitely, not a real person, but they do a good job and they make you feel everything, and it just makes those scenes that much more effective when they go practical, and they do such a good job with the practical effects. I also very much enjoyed the Christmas aesthetic that the film had in this movie. They did a good job of really not doing like a modern Christmas setting. Like it doesn't look at all like what it does currently, in current day around the Christmas time, but it looks more like it did, back in the 80s and the 90s. And, someone who grew up in, not in the 80s, but in the late 90s, early 2000s, that was a cool, like, nostalgic little detail that I thought Damien Leone did. And yeah, so I very much enjoyed the Christmas setting. There's obviously certain scenes with art that play into that Christmas setting. I thought those were very clever and worked very well for the film. But I definitely have to talk about David Howard Thornton's performance as Art the Clown. At this point, he's a horror icon. He is up there with some of the bigger names in horror. I was very surprised when I went to the screening. almost every person in my theater was wearing some type of Terrifier shirt, merch, something. And I'm like, I haven't seen that at a film in so long. But yeah, in this film, his performance is he's just so good. He doesn't talk, right? That's just the nature of his character. So he has to act with his facial expressions, with his eyes, with his emotions. And, in this movie especially, his balance was it was done very well. There were moments where he was absolutely terrifying, but then there was also moments where he had my entire theater laughing. And I felt like in this film, particularly compared to 2 and 1, he does a lot better of a job at balancing and making it a little bit more lighthearted. So I really enjoyed that. Like I said, laugh out loud moments from him, terrifying moments from him, and it's the best of both worlds. And I feel like he's really nailing this character. So if they do continue the franchise, which it's already been confirmed, we're at least getting another one. Um, you know, I feel confident that he's going to continue to deliver great performances and continue to make Art more of an icon than he already is. And then for every great villain, there has to be a great hero. Sienna, played by Lauren Lavera, absolutely fantastic in this film. Definitely is elevated to one of the best final girls of all time. Up there with Ripley, Jamie Lee, Sidney Prescott. And in this film, she does a great job. Definitely a different side of her character than what we got in part two. In this one, she's dealing with the trauma and the effects of what happened in that second film, and she's a little bit more unhinged, a little bit more crazy, just not as stable as she was in that second film, at least. But she still is just as badass as she was when push comes to shove and the moments come where she has to step up and be the final girl. She delivers. So yeah, to me, with these two films back to back, it's yin and yang. You can't have Art and him in these movies and him in particular become as iconic as they are without having a character like Sienna to battle with him and go back and forth with him. And again, not going to give anything away, but when we get those scenes where she has to go into action, I thought the action scenes were very well choreographed, very well performed, and it looks like in most of the scenes she's in the middle of them and working and through the stunts and everything. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but the way it was choreographed and the fight scenes happen worked very well for me. And then obviously after the last film, there was a lot of questions that were left unanswered about Art's origin, what it is that controls him. And I will say, not going to give anything away, they do give you some answers in this film, particularly when it comes to Art, and then also like Sienna's dad's involvement. You do get some answers, but they don't answer everything, right? I found that a little bit disappointing, but where the movie leaves you at, and the fact that we are getting a Terrifier 4, I kind of understand why they had to at least not answer everything. Would have liked a little bit more, but you get enough to leave you wanting more for the the next film that they're going to make. So hopefully, I hope they explore it in the next film. So those are all the things that I liked about the film, but I did want to talk about a couple of things that I didn't like. Firstly, Jonathan, Sienna's younger brother. I didn't really love the direction that they went, with his character. I don't really want to spoil what happens, but wasn't a huge fan. I expected a little bit more out of his character, especially since the actor's a little bit older now and can probably do a little bit more. So I was a little bit disappointed with that. And then also for me, I kind of talked about it a little bit. Again, won't spoil anything, but the ending leaves it in a place where we're setting up for part 4. And that was a tad bit disappointing to me. I did feel, like I would have liked a little bit more of a resolution in the story that they were telling in this film. So I don't want to go into it anymore, but a little bit disappointing for me on that end. And also, there's been a lot of online speculation, a lot of rumors about, whether or not Art decides to ex-nay children in this film. If you don't want to be spoiled on it, I guess end the video now. But yeah, that does happen. But the way it happens, I felt like was done as well as it possibly could have. But overall, guys, very much enjoyed this film. On a rating scale, I'm probably going to give it a 4 out of 5 stars. Can't wait to see part 4. If you guys have seen Terrifier 3, comment below, let me know what you thought. Have a great night.